The Korean Mafia boss was putting up posters on the street, desperate for the slightest clues about his missing younger brother. His hands, usually steady enough to pull a trigger without a tremor, shook as he smoothed the paper against the cold brick wall of an alleyway in Itaewon. Jinwoo Park was a man whose name whispered terror through the neon-lit corridors of Seoul's underworld. Yet here, in the biting November wind, he looked like nothing more than a fractured soul searching for the only piece of his humanity that remained. He pressed the tape down with unnecessary force, his knuckles white against the dampness of the wall. Beside him, his lieutenant Taemin held a stack of 3,000 more flyers, each bearing the photograph of a young man with gentle eyes and an uncertain smile. Minho Park, 23 years old, had vanished 18 days ago from the small bookshop he ran in Hongdae, the one place their father's money had never touched, the one dream Jinwoo had protected from the darkness of their family business. If you're ready for a story about family, betrayal, and the moment a monster discovers his own heart, hit that subscribe button right now. This story will break you in ways you never expected. It had been 18 agonizing days since Minho disappeared, leaving behind only an overturned chair and a cup of tea gone cold. The police had offered nothing but bureaucratic indifference, filing reports that would gather dust in forgotten cabinets. Jinwoo's own vast network of informants, the eyes and ears that stretched across every district of Seoul, had come up empty. It was as if Minho had simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the city that Jinwoo thought he controlled. The weight in his chest was suffocating, a mixture of rage and a hollow, gnawing grief that he had never allowed himself to feel before. He looked at the face on the poster, the younger brother he had raised after their parents died in a house fire 20 years ago. Minho had been only 3 years old then, small enough to carry, light enough to save. Jinwoo had been 13, already hard enough to drag them both out of the flames, already cold enough to survive what came after. "We will find him, boss," Taemin whispered, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. The words had become a mantra over the past 18 days, repeated so often they had lost all meaning. Jinwoo didn't respond. He simply grabbed another poster, his eyes scanning the indifferent crowd passing by on the rain-slicked street. Every face was a stranger, every shadow a potential threat, and every second that ticked by felt like a physical blow to his ribs. He was the king of an empire built on blood and fear, a man who had clawed his way from the ashes of that burning house to the top of Seoul's criminal hierarchy. He owned politicians, controlled shipping routes, and commanded the loyalty of 300 men who would die at his word. Yet he was powerless to find the one person who gave his life meaning, the one person he had sworn to protect above all else. The rain began to fall harder, a cold assault that threatened to turn the paper in his hands to pulp, mirroring the disintegration of his hope. He stared at the empty street, the flickering neon signs casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to mock his desperation. Jinwoo had built his empire on the principle that everything could be taken, everything could be controlled, everything had a price. But the universe was teaching him a cruel lesson in the currency of helplessness. He was a man who took what he wanted, who commanded legions, who made problems disappear with a phone call. But tonight, standing in the rain with soggy posters in his scarred hands, he was just a brother lost in a world that had suddenly become much too large and much too quiet. The bell above the small cafe door chimed with a bright, cheerful ring as Jinwoo stepped inside, seeking a moment of shelter from the downpour that had turned Seoul's streets into rivers. The warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon pastries, a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of his penthouse in Gangnam. The cafe was small, wedged between a vinyl record shop and a vintage clothing store, the kind of place that attracted university students and artists, people whose lives were blessedly uncomplicated by the weight of violence. Behind the counter stood a young woman arranging cups with practiced efficiency. Her rich brown skin glowed under the warm pendant lights, and her natural hair was pulled back into a ponytail that swayed as she moved. She wore a simple black apron over a cream-colored sweater, and when she looked up at the sound of the bell, her eyes were the warmest brown Jean Wu had ever seen. This was Keisha Thompson, 28 years old, an English teacher from Atlanta who had come to Seoul 3 years ago to escape the suffocating grief of losing her younger sister to gun violence. She had needed to be somewhere where nothing reminded her of Jasmine's laugh, where the streets didn't echo with the ghost of a girl who would never grow up. Seoul had been random, a pin dropped on a map, but it had become home in the way that broken people sometimes find sanctuary in the unfamiliar. She taught at a private language academy during the week and worked at this cafe on weekends, saving money with no particular goal except the vague notion that someday she might feel whole enough to return to a life that made sense. Keisha looked up as the drenched man entered, and her breath caught slightly. He was tall, powerfully built, wearing an expensive black coat that was soaked through. But it wasn't his appearance that stopped her. It was the look in his eyes, a desperation so profound it seemed to pull all the light from the room. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled, rain-damaged poster. She recognized that look. She had worn it herself for months after Jasmine died. That expression of someone searching for something they would never find. Her heart did a strange, painful twist in her chest as she watched him stand there, water dripping onto the worn wooden floor, his eyes scanning the cafe as if he didn't quite know where he was. Keisha's gaze fell to the poster in his hand, and the world tilted sideways. She had seen that face every single day for the past 2 weeks. She had made that face breakfast this morning, scrambled eggs with too much pepper the way he liked them. She had listened to that face read poetry out loud in Korean while she corrected English essays at her small kitchen table. That face was currently in her apartment 3 blocks away, probably reading one of the philosophy books he loved, wrapped in the oversized blanket she had given him because he was always cold. She froze, the coffee cup in her hand hovering in midair. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that made her breath hitch. She looked at the man more carefully now, noticing the hardness in his jaw, the profound exhaustion etched into the corners of his eyes, the way his free hand was clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles had gone white. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a precipice, one breath away from falling into an abyss that would swallow him whole. Keisha's mind raced back to 2 weeks ago, to the rainy Tuesday evening when she had found the young man huddled in the doorway of a closed shop near Hongdae Station. He had been soaking wet, shivering violently, his eyes wide with terror that seemed to exist beyond the physical cold. When she had approached him, asking in her careful Korean if he needed help, he had flinched so hard he hit his head against the metal door behind him. There was a fresh bruise blooming on his temple, and his hands were scraped raw. He had looked at her with the eyes of a frightened animal, unable or unwilling to speak. She had tried calling the police, but he had grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, shaking his head frantically, tears streaming down his face. The word he had managed to choke out over and over was a single syllable that sounded like no, no, no. Something in Keisha's chest had cracked open at that moment. She saw Jasmine in his terrified eyes, saw every lost and frightened person she had failed to save, including herself. So she had made a choice that defied all logic and self-preservation. She had taken off her coat and wrapped it around his shoulders. She had helped him stand on shaking legs. And she had brought him home to her tiny apartment, this stranger who couldn't or wouldn't tell her his name. For the first 3 days, he had barely spoken, jumping at every sound, refusing to go near the windows. He slept curled in a ball on her couch, whimpering in his sleep. Keisha had called in sick to work, spending her days coaxing him to eat, to drink water, to believe that he was safe. Gradually, painfully, he had begun to emerge from his shell of trauma. His name was Minho, he had finally whispered on the 4th day. He loved books and hated violence and had dreams of opening a bookshop that sold only poetry. He had a brother, But he couldn't talk about his brother. His face would close up and terror would flood back into his eyes whenever the subject arose. Keisha had learned not to push, had learned to let him exist in the small safe bubble of her apartment where the past couldn't reach him. Over the past 2 weeks, she had watched him slowly come back to life. He had started smiling, had started reading to her from Korean poetry collections, translating the beautiful, mournful verses into halting English. He had told her about his bookshop, about the customers who came looking for solace between pages, about the life he was building that was gentle and kind. And now, standing behind the counter of this cafe, Keisha understood with a sickening clarity that the man in front of her, this desperate, dangerous-looking man with a poster bearing Minho's face, was the brother. The brother that Minho was terrified of. The brother that had driven him into the rain-soaked night, bruised and broken and unable to speak. Every protective instinct in Keisha's body screamed at her to stay silent, to let this man leave, to protect the frightened young man who had become something like family to her. But she looked at the poster again, at the anguish carved into this stranger's face, and she saw something that gave her pause. This wasn't the face of someone who had hurt Minho. This was the face of someone who was being destroyed by his absence. Keisha set down the coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. She stepped around the counter, her voice coming out softer than she intended, barely audible over the jazz music playing from the cafe speakers. "Sir," she began, her eyes locking onto his. "That young man, I know where he is." The words hung in the air between them like a held breath. Jinwoo spun around so fast that Taemin, who had been standing by the door, instinctively reached for the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. The world seemed to stop, the hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of the other cafe patrons fading into a dull roar in Jinwoo's ears. He stared at this woman, this stranger with kind eyes and an American accent, trying to process the words she had just spoken. "What did you say?" His voice came out as a rough whisper, barely controlled. "Tell me again. Where is my brother?" The desperation in his tone was so raw, so completely stripped of the commanding authority he usually wielded, that several customers turned to look. Keisha saw the tears gathering in his eyes, saw the mask of the dangerous man beginning to crumble to reveal something much more vulnerable underneath. "He's safe," Keisha said quietly, her hands coming up in a calming gesture. "He's been staying with me for 2 weeks. I found him near Hongdae Station. He was hurt and scared." And she paused, choosing her words carefully. "He couldn't tell me what happened. But I couldn't just leave him there. I took him home." Jinwoo's knees nearly buckled. He reached out, gripping the edge of a nearby table to steady himself, his breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. Taemin moved closer, concerned, but Jinwoo waved him away with a shaking hand. The relief that flooded through him was so intense it was almost painful, a physical wave that threatened to drown him. For 18 days, he had imagined every horrible possibility. Minho dead in a ditch, Minho tortured by rivals, Minho sold into some nightmare that Jinwoo's own dark imagination could conjure. But he was safe. He was with this woman who smelled like coffee and kindness, who had taken in a terrified stranger and asked for nothing in return. "Take me to him," Jinwoo said, and it wasn't a command despite his attempt to make it sound like one. It was a plea, desperate and broken. "Please, right now." Keisha hesitated, studying his face. She saw the same desperate love there that she had felt for Jasmine, the kind of love that would burn the world down to keep someone safe. But she also saw something else, something harder and more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. "Minho is very fragile right now," Keisha said carefully. "Whatever happened to him, it left him traumatized. If you're the reason he was hurt, if you're the reason he's afraid, then I won't." Jinwoo cut her off, his voice cracking. "I would never hurt him. Never. He's my brother. He's all I have. Please." The sincerity in his voice, the naked pain, convinced her. Keisha nodded slowly, untying her apron. Let me tell my manager I need to leave, she said. Wait here. As she walked to the back room, Taemin leaned close to Jinwoo, his voice low. Boss, this could be a trap. We should bring more men, secure the location first. Jinwoo shook his head, water droplets flying from his dark hair. No, if she wanted to harm us, she wouldn't have told me anything. She would have let me walk out into the rain and keep searching forever. This woman, she saved him when I couldn't. When Keisha returned, pulling on a raincoat, she led them out into the downpour. The walk to her apartment felt like an eternity to Jinwoo. Every step a battle between hope and fear. What if Minho didn't want to see him? What if his brother looked at him with hatred or fear? What if Jinwoo's world, the violent empire he had built, had finally destroyed the one pure thing he had tried to protect? They walked through narrow streets, past convenience stores and late-night restaurants, the neon signs reflecting in puddles that had become small lakes. Keisha led them to an older building, the kind that had been built in the 70s and showed its age in every crack in the concrete. She climbed the stairs to the third floor, Jinwoo and Taemin following in tense silence. When she reached her door, she turned to face Jinwoo, her expression serious. He's been through something terrible, Keisha said quietly. Please be gentle. Don't push him to talk about what he's not ready to share. Jinwoo nodded, his throat too tight for words. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples, in his fingertips, in every nerve of his body. Keisha unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell that wafted out hit Jinwoo like a physical blow. It was the smell of jasmine tea and old books, of safety and warmth, of everything he had tried to preserve in Minho's life despite the darkness of his own. The apartment was small and cluttered in a comfortable way, with bookshelves lining the walls and plants on every available surface. And there, sitting cross-legged on a worn couch with a book open in his lap, was Minho. He looked up at the sound of the door, a smile starting to form for Keisha, and then he saw his brother. The book slipped from his hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. His face went through a series of expressions so quickly they blurred together: surprise, fear, confusion, and then something that looked almost like relief before the fear came rushing back. Hyung, Minho whispered, the formal term for older brother barely audible. Jinwoo felt his knees give out. He hit the floor hard, not caring about the pain, not caring about anything except the fact that his brother was alive and whole and right there in front of him. Minho, he choked out, the name a jagged piece of glass in his throat. I thought I couldn't find you, I've been. The words dissolved into sobs that shook his entire frame. Jinwoo Park, the man who had killed his first person at 16, who had built an empire on fear and blood, who had never shown weakness in front of anyone, wept like a child. Minho sat frozen on the couch, his own eyes filling with tears. He looked at Keisha, who was standing by the door with her hand over her mouth, her own face wet with tears. Then he looked back at his brother, at this man who had raised him and protected him and loved him with a fierceness that had sometimes felt suffocating, and something in his chest cracked open. Minho slid off the couch and moved toward his brother slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. When he was close enough, he reached out a hesitant hand and touched Jinwoo's shoulder. Hyung, Minho said again, his voice stronger this time. I'm okay. I'm safe. Jinwoo looked up, his face ravaged by tears, and pulled his brother into a crushing embrace. He buried his face in Minho's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, the proof that he was real and alive. I'm sorry, Jinwoo whispered against his brother's shirt. I'm so sorry. I couldn't protect you. I failed you. If you're feeling this moment right in your chest, smash that like button. Because what happens next is going to shatter everything you think you know about this story. Minho pulled back slightly, his hands gripping his brother's shoulders. You didn't fail me, Hyung. You never failed me. Jinwoo shook his head violently. You disappeared. Someone took you, someone hurt you. He gestured to the fading bruise on Minho's temple. I will find them. I will make them pay for every second of fear you felt. I will burn down every building in Seoul until I find who did this to you. The violence in Jinwoo's voice made Keisha take an involuntary step back, reminded suddenly of the dangerous world this man inhabited. But Minho didn't flinch. He looked at his brother with an expression that was infinitely sad and infinitely tired. Hyung, Minho said quietly, nobody took me. I ran away. The words landed like a physical blow. Jinwoo stared at his brother, unable to process what he had just heard. What? No, you couldn't have. You were hurt, you were terrified. Minho nodded slowly. I was terrified, but not because someone kidnapped me. I was terrified because I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. Something about you. Jinwoo's blood ran cold. What did you hear? Minho looked down at his hands, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I was at the bookshop closing up for the night. You remember Director Sung? Your business partner? The man you've worked with for 5 years? Jinwoo nodded, a terrible suspicion beginning to form in his gut. Director Sung came to my shop that night. He didn't know I was still there. I was in the back room doing inventory. He was on the phone, and he was speaking to someone about you. Minho's hands were shaking now, the memory clearly painful. He said that you had become a liability, that your protection of me made you weak, made you vulnerable. He said that the organization would be stronger without you, that once you were eliminated, he could take control and expand the operations without your moral limitations. The room seemed to tilt. Jinwoo felt like the floor had opened beneath him. Director Sung, the man he had trusted with his life, the man who had stood beside him for 5 years as they built their empire, was planning to kill him. But that's not the worst part, Minho continued, his voice breaking. He said the best way to destroy you was to make it look like I had been killed by a rival gang. He said that once you believed I was dead, you would be so consumed by rage that you would make mistakes. You would start a war that would give him the excuse to have you eliminated by your own people, claiming you had become reckless and dangerous. Jinwoo couldn't breathe. The betrayal was so enormous, so complete, that it felt like his chest was being crushed. I heard him say my name, Minho whispered. I heard him describe how they would stage it, how they would make sure my body was found in a way that would break you completely. And I panicked. I ran out the back door. I didn't take my phone, I didn't take my wallet, I just ran. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and then I didn't know where I was or what to do. I was terrified that if I contacted you, they would find me. I thought if I disappeared completely, maybe they wouldn't go through with it. Maybe you would be safe if I was just gone. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Minho hadn't been kidnapped. He had sacrificed himself, had chosen to vanish into the city rather than be used as a weapon against his brother. Jinwoo looked at this young man, this gentle soul who had tried to protect him in the only way he knew how, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. You've been living here for 2 weeks, Jinwoo said, looking around the small apartment. Keisha has been taking care of you. Minho nodded, turning to look at Keisha with an expression of deep gratitude. She found me when I had nothing. She gave me food and shelter and safety. She asked for nothing in return. She didn't even know who I was. Jinwoo stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He walked over to Keisha, who was watching the scene with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the revelation of betrayal and violence that had just unfolded in her living room. He stopped in front of her and bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect that made Taemin's eyes widen in shock. You saved my brother's life, Jinwoo said, his voice thick with emotion. You protected him when I couldn't. You gave him sanctuary when the world he knew had turned into a nightmare. There are no words adequate to thank you for this. Keisha shook her head, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gratitude. I just did what anyone should do. He needed help, I helped him. But that's not true, Jinwoo said, straightening. Most people would have walked past. Most people would have called the authorities and moved on with their lives. You took him into your home. You gave him your time, your resources, your care. You risked yourself for a stranger. That is not something just anyone would do. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. And now, because you did that kindness, you are in danger. If Director Sung discovers that Min-ho is alive, if he finds out you have been sheltering him, he will come for you. He will not hesitate to kill you to tie up this loose end. The color drained from Keisha's face. I don't understand. Why would anyone want to hurt me? I'm just a teacher. I'm nobody. You're the person who knows the truth, Jinwoo said grimly. You're the person who can testify that Min-ho was hiding from a threat, that he was running from something specific. You're a witness, and in my world, witnesses don't live long. Keisha felt her legs go weak. She sat down heavily on the arm of the couch, her mind racing. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to help. I know, Jinwoo said gently, but good intentions don't protect you from bad men. From this moment on, you are under my protection. You will come with us. You will stay somewhere safe until I can eliminate the threat. Eliminate the threat, Keisha repeated, her voice hollow. You mean kill him? Kill Director Sung and anyone else involved in the plan to use Min-ho against you. Jinwoo didn't deny it. Yes, this is the world I live in. This is the only language that men like Director Sung understand. If I show mercy, if I show weakness, they will see it as an invitation to try again. The only way to keep Min-ho safe, to keep you safe, is to remove the threat permanently. Keisha looked at Min-ho, who was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. Is this what you want? She asked him. For your brother to kill people because of you? Min-ho looked up, his eyes red from crying. I don't want anyone to die. But I also know my brother. I know the world he lives in. If Director Sung isn't stopped, he won't stop with just trying to kill Hyung. He'll keep going until he has eliminated everyone who might threaten his control. Including me. Including you now. I hate it, but I understand it. Keisha felt like she was standing at a crossroads, looking down two paths that both led to darkness. On one side, she could refuse Jinwoo's protection, could try to go back to her normal life and pretend that the past 2 weeks hadn't happened. But she knew, deep in her bones, that this Director Sung would find her eventually. Men who planned murders didn't leave loose ends. On the other side, she could accept Jinwoo's protection, could enter his world of violence and fear, could become complicit in the deaths that would follow. The choice felt impossible, a betrayal of everything she believed in. But then she looked at Min-ho, at this gentle young man who had read her poetry and helped her cook dinner and slowly healed in the safety of her small apartment. She thought about Jasmine, about how she would have done anything, would have made any choice to keep her sister safe. Okay, Keisha said quietly. I'll come with you, but I have conditions. Jinwoo raised an eyebrow, surprised. You're in no position to negotiate conditions. Maybe not, Keisha said, her voice growing stronger. But I'm doing it anyway. First, Min-ho gets to choose what happens next. If he wants to stay hidden, you let him stay hidden. If he wants to leave Seoul entirely, you help him do that. You don't force him into your world just because it's easier for you. Jinwoo looked at his brother, then back at Keisha. Agreed. Second, you don't hurt anyone who isn't directly involved in the plot against you. No collateral damage. No killing someone just because they might know something. You promised you want to keep me safe. Prove it by not turning me into an accomplice to mass murder. Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment. That may not be possible. In my world, things are not always clean. Sometimes innocent people get caught in the crossfire. Then you make sure they don't, Keisha said firmly. You're powerful enough to control your own actions. Choose to be better than the people trying to kill you. Jinwoo saw something in her eyes that reminded him of why he had worked so hard to keep Min-ho separate from his world. She had a moral clarity that he had lost years ago, a belief that right and wrong still mattered. It was naive and impractical and completely incompatible with the realities of his life. But it was also beautiful, and he found himself wanting to protect that innocence, even if he couldn't share it. I will do my best, Jinwoo said finally. But I make no promises I cannot keep. That will have to be enough. Keisha nodded, knowing it was the best she would get. Third and final condition, when this is over, when Minho is safe and the threat is gone, you let me go back to my life. You don't try to keep me in your world. You don't decide that I know too much and need to be silenced. You let me walk away. Jinwoo extended his hand. I agree to your terms. Keisha shook his hand, sealing the bargain that would pull her irrevocably into a world of shadows and violence. The transition from Keisha's small apartment to Jinwoo's fortified compound happened with dizzying speed. Within an hour, they were in the back of an armored sedan, driving through the rain-soaked streets of Seoul toward Gangnam. Minho sat between Jinwoo and Keisha, holding both their hands, a bridge between two incompatible worlds. Taemin sat in the front passenger seat, speaking quietly into a phone, coordinating security and logistics. The compound, when they arrived, was exactly what Keisha had imagined from crime movies. High walls, armed guards, cameras on every corner. The house itself was enormous, all glass and steel and modern architecture that screamed wealth and power. They were ushered inside by silent staff who bowed deeply to Jinwoo and didn't make eye contact. Minho was shown to a bedroom that was larger than Keisha's entire apartment, with a view of the Han River that would have been breathtaking if the circumstances had been different. Keisha was given a guest suite on the same floor, luxury accommodations that felt more like a gilded cage. When she was finally alone, she sat on the edge of the enormous bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 3 hours. This morning, she had been a simple English teacher working a weekend shift at a cafe. Now she was under the protection of a Korean crime lord, living in his fortress, waiting for a war to begin. There was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," Keisha called out, expecting one of the staff. Instead, Jinwoo entered, looking exhausted but more composed than he had been at the cafe. He had changed out of his wet clothes into a simple black shirt and pants, and his hair was damp from a recent shower. "May I speak with you?" he asked, surprisingly polite. Keisha nodded, gesturing to a chair by the window. Jinwoo sat down heavily, the weight of the world visible in every line of his body. "I need to explain something to you," he began, "about why Minho's safety is so important to me, why I have worked so hard to keep him separate from my business." Keisha listened quietly as Jinwoo told her the story of the fire, of pulling his 3-year-old brother from the flames while their parents burned. He told her about the years of poverty that followed, about how he had turned to crime not out of ambition but out of desperation to feed and clothe a small child. He told her about the first time he had killed someone, a rival gang member who had threatened Minho when he was 7 years old. He told her about the moment he had decided that Minho would never know this world, would never be tainted by the blood on Jinwoo's hands. "I gave him everything I never had," Jinwoo said quietly. "Education, safety, the freedom to pursue dreams that had nothing to do with survival. I kept him away from my business so completely that most of my associates didn't even know I had a brother. It was the one good thing I ever did, the one piece of my soul that stayed clean. And now that sanctuary has been shattered because someone I trusted decided to use my love against me." Keisha felt an unexpected sympathy for this man. She had assumed he was simply a monster, but the truth was more complicated. He was a monster who loved his brother, a killer who had tried to protect innocence even while destroying it in others. "What will you do now?" Keisha asked. Jinwoo's expression hardened. "Tomorrow I will call a meeting of my inner circle. I will tell them that Minho has been found safe. I will watch their reactions carefully. Director Sung doesn't know that Minho heard his conversation, doesn't know that his plan has been exposed. He will react to the news of Minho's return, and that reaction will tell me everything I need to know about who else is involved. And then, Keisha pressed, and then I will do what needs to be done to protect my family, Jinwoo said simply. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken violence. That night, Keisha lay in the unfamiliar bed, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about Minho's face when he had seen his brother, the mixture of fear and relief. She thought about Jinwoo's story, about a 13-year-old boy carrying his baby brother out of a burning house. She thought about her own sister, about Jasmine's last moments, about the senseless violence that had taken her. Around 3 in the morning, Keisha got up and wandered through the quiet house. She found Minho in the library, a vast room lined with books from floor to ceiling. He was curled up in a leather chair, reading by lamplight. Couldn't sleep? Keisha asked softly. Minho looked up, managing a weak smile. Too many memories, too many thoughts. This house, I grew up here, but it never felt like home. It always felt like Hyung's fortress, the place where he kept me safe from the world he worked in. Keisha sat down in the chair across from him. Are you angry at him? For the life he chose? For bringing you into this danger? Minho considered the question carefully. I used to be angry. When I was younger, I resented him for being what he is. I wanted a normal brother, someone who came to my school events and met my friends without terrifying them. But as I got older, I understood. Everything he did for me. The violence, the crime, it all started as a way to keep us alive. And somewhere along the way, it became who he was. Do you think he can change? Keisha asked. Minho shook his head sadly. No, this is his world now. He's too deep in it to ever walk away. The best I can hope for is that he survives it, that he doesn't let it destroy him completely. That's why I wanted the bookshop, why I built a life so separate from his. I wanted to prove that we could both exist, that his choices didn't have to define my entire world. Keisha understood that desire all too well. She had come to Seoul for the same reason, to build a life separate from the violence that had defined her for too long. The next morning, Jinwoo gathered his inner circle in the compound's conference room. 8 men sat around a polished table, all of them senior members of his organization. Director Sung was among them, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a face that projected calm competence. He had been Jinwoo's right hand for 5 years, the architect of their expansion into legitimate businesses that laundered their criminal proceeds. Taemin stood against the wall, his hand resting casually near his concealed weapon, watching everyone carefully. I have called you here with good news, Jinwoo began, his voice betraying none of the tension he felt. My brother Minho, who has been missing for 18 days, has been found. He is alive and well. The reactions around the table varied. Some men showed genuine relief, others mild interest. But Director Sung's face did something very subtle, very quick. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, and his hand twitched toward his phone before he caught himself. It was enough. Jinwoo saw it, and he knew with absolute certainty that Minho had told the truth. That is wonderful news, Director Sung said smoothly, his composure recovered. Where was he found? What happened to him? He was staying with a kind stranger who helped him when he was in distress, Jinwoo said, watching the man's face carefully. He had some trouble, became confused and frightened. But he is safe now, here with me. Director Sung nodded, but Jinwoo could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The man was trying to figure out how much Minho remembered, whether his plan had been exposed. I would like to see him, Director Sung said, to welcome him back personally. I'm sure he would appreciate that, Jinwoo replied, his voice carefully neutral. Perhaps later this week, once he has had time to rest and recover. The meeting continued with discussion of various business matters, but Jinwoo's attention was focused entirely on Director Sung. He watched the man's hands, the way they occasionally trembled slightly. He watched his eyes, the way they kept darting to the door as if calculating escape routes. He watched his breathing, shallow and controlled, the breathing of someone under immense stress. After the meeting concluded and the men began to file out, Director Sung lingered. Jin-woo, might I have a private word? Of course, Jin-woo said, gesturing for Tae-min to stay. Whatever you wish to say, you can say in front of Tae-min. Director Sung hesitated, then nodded. I wanted to express my relief that Min-ho has been found. I know how worried you have been. In fact, I have been conducting my own investigation into his disappearance. I have some information that you might find disturbing. Jin-woo felt his muscles tense. Oh, what information is that? I have reason to believe that Min-ho's disappearance was not random, Director Sung said carefully. I believe it may have been orchestrated by rivals who sought to use him as leverage against you. I have been gathering evidence, and I think I have identified the parties responsible. Jin-woo felt a cold fury building in his chest. The audacity of this man, to stand here and fabricate a story, to try to redirect suspicion onto innocent parties. Who do you suspect? Director Sung pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like documents. The Red Phoenix gang has been making moves into our territory. I believe they took Min-ho as part of a larger plan to weaken your position. I have locations where I believe they are holding evidence of their involvement. It was a masterful performance. Director Sung was trying to manipulate Jin-woo into starting a war with a rival gang, exactly as Min-ho had overheard. The violence would give Director Sung the perfect cover to eliminate Jin-woo, claiming he had become too reckless, too consumed by revenge. Tell me, Jin-woo said quietly, when did you begin this investigation? Director Sung smiled. The moment I heard Min-ho was missing. I knew how important he is to you. I wanted to help in any way I could. Jin-woo stood slowly, walking around the table toward Director Sung. The older man's smile faltered slightly as Jin-woo approached. You have been very thorough, Jin-woo said. Very dedicated. It almost sounds as if you knew where to look before Min-ho even disappeared. Director Sung's face went pale. I don't understand what you mean. I think you understand perfectly, Jin-woo said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I think you knew exactly where to look because you were the one who planned it. You were the one who decided that my love for my brother made me weak. You were the one who thought you could use Min-ho's death to destroy me. Director Sung stepped back, his hand reaching into his jacket. He never completed the motion. Tae-min moved with lethal speed, his weapon drawn and pressed against the back of Director Sung's head before the older man's fingers even touched his own gun. I would recommend staying very still, Tae-min said calmly. Jin-woo reached into Director Sung's jacket and removed his weapon, a small pistol that he placed on the table. Now, Jin-woo said, his voice still eerily calm, you are going to tell me everything. Who else is involved in your plan? Who else knows about your intention to kill me and blame it on my reaction to Min-ho's death? Director Sung's composure finally cracked. His face twisted with a mixture of fear and rage. You were supposed to be broken by now, he hissed. You were supposed to be consumed by grief, making reckless decisions that would justify your removal. But that stupid boy ran instead of dying like he was supposed to. He ruined everything. The admission hung in the air like poison. So you admit it, Jin-woo said. You admit you planned to kill my brother, to use his death as a weapon against me. Director Sung laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Of course I planned it. You have become a liability to this organization. Your sentimentality, your protection of that weak boy, it makes you vulnerable. Real power requires the willingness to sacrifice anything, anyone. You have never understood that. Jin-woo felt something cold settle in his chest. You're wrong, he said quietly. I understand sacrifice better than you ever could. I have sacrificed my soul, my humanity, my chance at any kind of normal life. I have sacrificed everything except my brother, because he is the one thing that reminds me I was once human. And you thought you could take that from me. Director Sung spat on the floor. Sentiment is weakness. You should have learned that years ago. Jinwoo looked at this man he had trusted, this man who had stood beside him for 5 years, and felt nothing but a cold, clinical need for this threat to be removed. Take him to the lower level, Jinwoo ordered Taemin. I want a full list of everyone involved in this plot. Everyone who knew, everyone who helped, everyone who planned to benefit from my death. And then I want you to make examples of them. Examples that will ensure no one ever thinks to betray this family again. As Taemin dragged Director Sung from the room, the man screamed threats and curses, his composure completely shattered. Jinwoo stood alone in the conference room, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. He knew what Taemin would do in the lower level, knew the kind of information extraction that would occur. He knew that by tomorrow, Director Sung and his co-conspirators would be nothing but a message to anyone else who might consider betrayal. He walked slowly back to the residential wing of the compound, his mind a tangle of dark thoughts. When he reached Minho's room, he found his brother sitting with Keisha, both of them looking up as he entered. "It's done," Jinwoo said simply. "Director Sung has confessed. He and everyone involved in the plot will be dealt with by morning." Minho's face went pale. "Dealt with? You mean killed?" "Yes," Jinwoo said, not bothering to soften the truth. "They plan to kill you, to use your death to destroy me. I will not allow them to live with that knowledge, with that intention. I will not spend the rest of my life waiting for them to try again." Keisha stood up, her expression troubled. "There has to be another way. You could go to the police, you could." Jinwoo cut her off with a harsh laugh. "The police? Half of them are on Director Sung's payroll. The other half wouldn't care about gang violence. No, the only justice in my world is the justice I create." Minho looked at his brother with infinite sadness. "I never wanted this. I never wanted people to die because of me. You didn't cause this," Jinwoo said firmly. "Director Sung's ambition caused this. His greed, his willingness to kill an innocent person to gain power, that's what caused this. You are the victim here, not the catalyst." "But I am the catalyst," Minho said quietly. "If I didn't exist, if you didn't love me, you would be safer. You would be the ruthless leader they expected, the man who couldn't be manipulated through emotion. Maybe you would be better off if I really had disappeared." Jinwoo crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed his brother's shoulders, looking into his eyes with an intensity that was almost painful. "Don't ever say that. Don't ever think that. You are the only thing in this world that makes me human. You are the only reason I have any conscience left at all. Without you, I would be nothing but a monster. I would be exactly the kind of man who would kill his own brother if it served his ambition." The room fell silent. Keisha watched the 2 brothers, seeing the complexity of their bond, the way love and violence were so tangled together in their lives that they couldn't be separated. She thought about her own life, about the choices she had made, about the violence that had taken Jasmine from her. She had spent 3 years running from that pain, building a new life in Seoul where she could pretend the past didn't exist. But standing here in this fortress, watching these 2 men navigate their impossible relationship, she realized something. Running hadn't healed her. It had just postponed the grief. "I need to tell you something," Keisha said suddenly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. Both brothers turned to look at her. "I haven't been completely honest with you about why I'm in Seoul." Jinwoo's expression became guarded. "What do you mean?" Keisha took a deep breath, preparing to share a truth she had kept locked away for 3 years. "I came to Seoul because my younger sister was killed in a drive-by shooting in Atlanta. She was 15 years old, wrong place, wrong time. The shooters were never caught. The investigation went nowhere. And I couldn't stay in a city where every street corner reminded me of her." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "When I found Minho in that doorway, terrified and alone, I saw Jasmine. I saw the sister I couldn't save. And I made a choice to save him instead, to give him the protection and safety that I couldn't give her. So when you thank me for saving your brother, you should know that I wasn't being selfless. I was being selfish. I was trying to fix something that can never be fixed. Minho stood up and walked over to Keisha, taking her hands in his. You gave me safety when I had none. You gave me kindness when I was broken. Whatever your reasons, you saved my life. That matters. Jinwoo looked at this woman with new understanding. She wasn't just a kind stranger. She was someone who understood loss, who understood the desperate need to protect the people you love. She was someone whose heart had been shattered by violence, just like his had been forged by it. We are not so different, you and I, Jinwoo said quietly. We have both been shaped by violence. We have both lost people we love. The difference is that I became the violence and you ran from it. Keisha nodded, wiping her eyes. Maybe that's why I can see you clearly. I know what violence costs. I know what it takes from you. And I can see that you're not a monster, not completely. You're a man who has made terrible choices in service of love. The moment was interrupted by Taemin, who appeared in the doorway looking grim. Boss, we have a problem. Director Sung wasn't working alone. He had outside support. Jinwoo's entire body tensed. From who? The prosecutor's office. Taemin said quietly. Specifically, Prosecutor Han Jae-sung. The man who has been investigating our organization for the past 2 years. Director Sung was feeding him information, positioning himself to take over once you were arrested or killed. And there's more. He has documentation, financial records, witness statements, recordings, enough to bring down the entire organization. If this revelation just hit you like a truck, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Because this story is about to go somewhere you never expected. The implications crashed over Jinwoo like a wave. Director Sung hadn't just been planning a simple coup. He had been systematically building a case with law enforcement, preparing to use the legal system to destroy Jinwoo's empire while positioning himself as a reformed insider helping to bring down a criminal organization. It was brilliant and devastating. Where are these documents? Jinwoo demanded. Taemin shook his head. Director Sung says they're in a secure location, set to be automatically delivered to multiple news outlets and law enforcement agencies if he doesn't check in every 24 hours. A dead man's switch. If we kill him, the information goes public. Jinwoo felt the walls closing in. He looked at Minho, at Keisha, at the fragile sanctuary he had tried to build within his fortress. Everything was collapsing. If those documents went public, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. His organization would be dismantled. And Minho, innocent Minho who had only ever wanted to sell books and read poetry, would be exposed to the world as the beloved brother of a crime lord, his life destroyed by association. There has to be a way to stop this, Keisha said. Some way to negotiate, to make a deal. Jinwoo shook his head bitterly. There are no deals to be made. Prosecutor Han has been hunting me for years. This is his victory. The only question is how much damage I can minimize before the walls come down. Minho stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. Let me talk to him. To Prosecutor Han. Let me offer him something he wants more than your conviction. Jinwoo stared at his brother. What could you possibly offer? The truth, Minho said. About Director Sung's plan. About how he was willing to kill an innocent person to gain power. About how he corrupted the prosecutor's office for his own ambition. If I testify against Director Sung, if I expose the conspiracy, Prosecutor Han might be willing to make a deal. He gets to take down a corrupt insider and expose police corruption. You get immunity in exchange for your cooperation. It was a desperate plan, full of holes and risks. But Jinwoo saw the determination in his brother's eyes, saw the man his little brother had become. You would do that? Expose yourself to the world, Put yourself in the crosshairs of every person who wants revenge against our family? For me? Minho smiled sadly. You carried me out of a fire when I was 3 years old. You raised me, protected me, gave me every opportunity you never had. This is the one thing I can do to protect you. Let me carry you for once. The meeting with Prosecutor Han Jae-sung was arranged for the following evening, in a neutral location, a private room at a high-end hotel. Jin-woo, Min-ho, Keisha, and Taemin arrived to find the prosecutor already there. A man in his 40s with sharp eyes and an expression of barely contained triumph. So, the great Jin-woo Park comes to negotiate, Prosecutor Han said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I never thought I would see this day. Save your gloating, Jin-woo said coldly. We have a proposition. Min-ho stepped forward before his brother could continue. Prosecutor Han, my name is Min-ho Park. I am the person who was the target of Director Sung's murder plot. I heard him on the phone planning my death and my brother's assassination. I am willing to testify to everything I heard, to provide you with a witness to conspiracy to commit murder. Prosecutor Han leaned back in his chair, studying Min-ho carefully. And what do you want in exchange for this testimony? Immunity for my brother, Min-ho said firmly. Full immunity from prosecution for any crimes he may have committed prior to this moment. In exchange, he will cooperate with your investigation into Director Sung and any other corrupt officials who were involved in this plot. The prosecutor laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think I would give up years of work, years of building a case against one of Seoul's most dangerous crime lords, in exchange for one relatively minor conspiracy case? Min-ho didn't flinch. I think you would if you understood the full scope of what Director Sung was doing. He pulled out a folder that Jin-woo had helped him prepare, filled with information that Taemin had extracted from Director Sung's interrogation. This contains evidence that Director Sung was not just planning to kill my brother and me. He was also embezzling funds from the organization, laundering money through offshore accounts, and bribing multiple judges and police officials. Some of those officials are people you work with, people you trust. If you prosecute my brother, this information dies with him. But if you grant him immunity, you get access to all of it. You get to clean up your own office, expose corruption at the highest levels, and still get a major conviction. Prosecutor Han took the folder, flipping through the pages. His expression slowly changed from skepticism to interest to barely concealed excitement. This is substantial, he admitted. But how do I know it's real? How do I know this isn't just fabricated evidence designed to save your brother? You don't, Keisha said, speaking up for the first time. But you can verify it. Every piece of information in that folder can be independently confirmed. Bank records, phone logs, surveillance footage. It's all real because Director Sung was arrogant enough to think he would never be caught. Prosecutor Han looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. And who are you in all of this? Just someone who got caught in the crossfire, Keisha said. Someone who helped Min-ho when he needed it and is now trying to help him finish this without more people dying. The prosecutor was silent for a long moment, the wheels clearly turning in his head. He looked at the evidence, then at Min-ho's determined face, then at Jin-woo's carefully neutral expression. Finally, he spoke. I can't give you full immunity. That's not possible given the extent of your brother's crimes. But I can offer you a deal. Jin-woo testifies against Director Sung and provides evidence against the corrupt officials. In exchange, he receives a reduced sentence, no more than 5 years, and the bulk of the organization's legitimate businesses remain intact to provide for you and your dependents. It wasn't what they had asked for, but Jin-woo saw the wisdom in it. 5 years was survivable. Min-ho would be safe, Keisha would be safe, and the infrastructure that supported the people who depended on him would remain. I accept, Jin-woo said quietly, with one additional condition. Min-ho and Keisha are placed in protective custody until Director Sung and all his co-conspirators are arrested. I won't have them used as leverage against me. Prosecutor Han nodded. Agreed. We have a deal. The handshake that sealed the agreement felt surreal to Keisha. She had walked into a cafe that morning expecting a normal day, and now she was witnessing a crime lord negotiate his own surrender to justice. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Director Sung and 14 other conspirators, including 3 judges and 5 police officials, were arrested in coordinated raids. The news exploded across Seoul, a corruption scandal of massive proportions. Jin-woo provided testimony, names, evidence, everything the prosecutor's office needed to build an airtight case. Min-ho was placed in a safe house with Keisha, protected by both police and Jin-woo's own people who remained loyal. The two of them spent the days reading, talking, processing everything that had happened. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset over Seoul, Min-ho turned to Keisha. What will you do after this is over? After Hyung goes to prison and I'm free to resume my life? Keisha had been thinking about that question constantly. I think I'll go back to the cafe, back to teaching, back to the quiet life I built. But now it will be different. Now I'll know that I didn't just run from violence. I faced it, I survived it, and I helped someone else survive it too. Min-ho smiled. Will you visit him? In prison? I think I should, Keisha said. Someone should remind him that there's still good in the world, that his brother turned out kind despite everything. Someone should make sure he doesn't forget why he made the choices he made. And maybe you could visit me too, Min-ho said quietly, at my bookshop, when it's safe to reopen. I would like to have a friend who understands all of this, who knows the truth and stays anyway. Keisha reached over and squeezed his hand. I would like that very much. On the day Jin-woo turned himself in to begin his sentence, he met with Min-ho and Keisha one final time. They stood in a private room at the prosecutor's office, saying goodbye under the watchful eyes of guards. Jin-woo looked at his brother, this young man who had grown up to be everything Jin-woo had hoped for, kind, thoughtful, brave in ways that had nothing to do with violence. Take care of yourself, Jin-woo said, pulling Min-ho into a tight embrace. Live the life I never could. Be happy. I will, Min-ho whispered, his voice choked with tears. And I'll wait for you. 5 years isn't forever. Jin-woo turned to Keisha, this woman who had saved his brother and, in a way, saved him too. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing us as human beings instead of just criminals. For choosing kindness when you could have chosen safety. Keisha nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying. She watched as Jin-woo was led away, his hands in cuffs but his head held high. He turned back once at the doorway, looking at his brother and the woman who had protected him, and Keisha saw something in his eyes that looked almost like peace. If this ending hit you differently than you expected, drop a like and subscribe for more stories about the complicated nature of love, justice, and redemption. Drop a comment and tell me, could you forgive someone who had done terrible things if they did them for the people they loved? I'll see you in the next one. 5 years later, Keisha stood outside a correctional facility in the outskirts of Seoul, waiting. Beside her was Min-ho, now 33, successful owner of a small but beloved bookshop that had become a gathering place for poets and dreamers. The gates opened, and Jin-woo walked out, older, grayer, but somehow lighter than he had been. He saw his brother and smiled, a genuine smile of joy and relief. Min-ho ran forward, embracing him tightly, both men crying without shame. When they finally pulled apart, Jin-woo looked at Keisha, who was hanging back respectfully. You came, he said, sounding surprised. I told you I would, Keisha replied. Someone had to make sure you remembered there was a world out here worth coming back to. Jin-woo walked over to her and bowed deeply. I have had 5 years to think about the choices I made, the life I lived. I cannot undo the past. I cannot bring back the people I hurt. But I can choose how I live the rest of my life. And I choose to honor the kindness you showed my brother, to try to be worthy of the second chance you both gave me. Keisha smiled. Then I think we should start by getting lunch. Minho knows a great noodle place near his shop. As the three of them walked toward the car, an unlikely family forged in fire and redeemed by choice, Keisha thought about how far they had all come. She had arrived in soul broken and running from pain. She was leaving this chapter of her life healed, not because the pain was gone, but because she had learned that facing it, helping others face theirs, was the only way through. Jin Woo had entered prison a feared crime lord. He was leaving it a man who had discovered that true strength wasn't in controlling others through fear, but in having the courage to change. And Min Ho, the gentle soul who had nearly been destroyed by the violence around him, had survived and built something beautiful in its wake. The sun was setting over Seoul as they drove toward the bookshop, the city lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. It wasn't a perfect ending. The scars remained. The losses could never be undone. But it was an ending that held the promise of something better, something honest, something earned. And sometimes Keisha thought that was enough.